This is another damn podcast about digital asset management. I'm Henrik Gyor. Today I'm speaking with Linda Tadic. Linda, how are you?
I'm doing great. Henrik, how are you doing?
Good. Linda, how are you involved with digital asset management?
Well, it's funny how I've come to this might be a little bit typical from how others have. My background really is as a film, video, television, and audio archivist, starting back in the mid 80s when everything was analog. And as we all know, everything has now shifted from analog to digital. So I would say basically all the positions and work I have been doing since 2000 have been digital related. And all of those jobs, once you have digital files, you have to deal with managing those files from before creation through archiving.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I've been involved with digital asset management from the aspect of manager of a digital asset management system, implementing systems, using archival preservation workflows through the digital asset management system. So that pretty much mainly for more hands-on implementation, I've been involved with digital asset management.
Great. And Linda, are there any grants available for digital asset management?
Well, grants are a little bit tough. Just by the nature of using the word grants, usually that means that the applicant organization must be a nonprofit
Mm-hmm.
organization or an educational or a cultural heritage institution,
Mm-hmm.
because funders give grants to, again, to nonprofit organizations. So thinking in terms of from the educational institution world, uh, those types of organizations don't really consider digital asset management at all. They're thinking, because when I look at digital asset management or think about that term, I'm thinking about you're using a system to for the whole life cycle of that digital asset from creation again all the way through archiving, and there could be some workflow as you're creating that digital asset. What these educational institutions are thinking about, though, are more like digital repositories or content management systems. So the grants that they're receiving and applying for are more to receive grants for digital repositories. And the difference there is where the repository is accepting digital assets that have reached the end of their creation period. They're already completed, they're done, there's metadata, and those are just uploaded into the repository.
I see.
And so then what the organizations are also doing, because this is what the funding world has been very interested in developing further, is working with open source tools.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, some of the open source digital repository applications you might hear out there like Fedora, DSpace, those are two of the major open source digital repositories. But those are also very complex to implement. And so essentially what's happening is these nonprofit educational institutions, they must become software developers themselves.
When you mentioned that they have to become the developers themselves, is it because there's a lack of support for those in comparison to other vendors that may give that type of support?
Well, it's basically because they have to become software developers, whether they hire staff to work on it or they already have internal talent that can work with the programming that's involved. But what is happening, because once you go open source,
Mm-hmm.
you then basically you're building this tool yourself, or you're hiring somebody to build it for you, and then you own the code.
Mm-hmm.
In contrast to going out and finding a vendor that can provide what you need and then perhaps doing some customization
Mm-hmm.
to suit your purposes. What people are finding, though, is ironically, they're thinking open source would be less expensive than just going to a vendor. But they're finding that pretty much it's either more expensive to do it open source, because then you must have the staff in order to keep it going and developing it further.
Sure. And supporting it,
Or
I guess. Mm-hmm.
yeah, so it's either the same cost or it could be even more expensive to go the open source route. However, what is appealing to these organizations and institutions is that they're then not dependent on a vendor who then might go out of business. And then
Mm-hmm.
they have this digital asset management system or digital repository in this case,
Mm-hmm.
which they have no further support.
And what advice would you like to give to DAM professionals and people aspiring to become DAM professionals?
Well, there are two areas that I think are so key for whether somebody is already working in the field or somebody who wants to become a damn professional.
Mm-hmm.
That's metadata and preservation. Metadata we hear so much about already, but I think that as preservation then becomes key within digital asset management systems, which I think is really in the near future, this is going to be a crucial area of growth in the field. You have to have far more discrete metadata in order to track these digital preservation actions, which must be done for your digital assets to survive in the coming years. So metadata, I think that the training in metadata has to go beyond just saying, okay, we want to have these fields. You can't just use basic keyword searching any longer, especially when you have thousands of items and you have perhaps different working states of files and different preservation actions. So I think that people should start studying metadata more, not just knowing what the standards are, but what is the type of metadata that really you should be tracking, the descriptive, the technical, and now the preservation metadata. But importantly along with that is, why does it have to be captured? Not just throwing around the terms or the words, but understanding the concepts behind it.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the preservation part of it also, as I mentioned, that with digital assets you have to keep preserving them, and preservation doesn't mean just backing them up and putting them on LTO tape or on servers, but you have to keep checking those files, make sure that there isn't any bit loss, as they're moved from one storage medium to another. And also perhaps there could be file formats that are becoming obsolete. Here we were all used to videotape becoming obsolete, every format becoming obsolete. Now it's digital files that are becoming obsolete.
Right.
So you have to track all this information in your digital asset management system so that you can migrate even that file format forward, not just the media that that file is sitting on. And the only way you'll do that is to actually have that data in your DAM. So you can just manage all of those different preservation actions.
Would you recommend a specific time frame to do that checking on a regular basis? Like, let's say you've archived a whole bunch of files with X file formats. How often would someone check their file formats to make sure that they're still current and usable?
Well, the way that how they can check the file formats to see if they would have to look at digital file format registries and really research those, because if in your database, in your DAM, you can easily search for, okay, how many assets do we have that are in format X?
Sure.
And because now you're learning that, oops, format X is no longer it's a proprietary format, it is no longer being supported. So perhaps we better check all those files and then consider, should we migrate them forward so we can use them in the future? That is just something that is constant. You just, as a digital asset manager, you have to be aware of what file formats are becoming obsolete, and your database will help you do that and manage those files. As far as then moving them to new media, then whether it's LTO tape or even like checking them sitting on servers is the pretty much what archivists are considering is every 3 to 5 years you have to check those files and make sure that they're still valid, the checksums are still valid, that there's no bit loss, especially with larger files. If you're working with moving image files with large video files, absolutely it's essential to check those files. Because the larger the file is, the more bits that can be lost. And if you have some bits that are corrupted, then that can perhaps corrupt your entire file.
Makes a lot of sense. So check your checksums, whatever checksum you happen to be using, like MD5 or whatever, and then also making sure that before you sunset or get rid of a piece of software that across your organization that can read file format X, make sure that you have something else that can read it or transfer it into another file format. Is that fair to say?
Right, yes. And what many archives are realizing they need to do, especially if they're working with proprietary file formats, is that they are saving the environment in which those files can be read or rendered. So that means saving all of the operating systems that file can be rendered in. So it's not only saving the assets, but again, saving the environment in which that asset can be read.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you so much, Linda.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
For more on digital asset management, log on to anotherDAMblog.com. Thanks again.